Buried behind bars, the cemetery, death row, and the silence of Angola prison. The silence before the shovel. At Angola, death never really leaves. It just waits, behind the walls. The morning air at Louisiana State Penitentiary tastes like metal and damp grass. The fog sits heavy over the Mississippi River, curling around the razor wire that marks the border between the living and the forgotten. Inside these 13,000 acres of farmland and fences, the largest maximum security prison in the United States, the line between a sentence and a burial plot is often just time. They call it the farm. But no one harvests hope here. Every inmate knows about Point Lookout Cemetery, even if they've never seen it. The place sits beyond the final gate, a stretch of land fenced off with weathered crosses, handmade markers, and rusted plaques bearing only numbers. It's where the men of Angola bury the men of Angola. No family, no music, no speeches. Just soil and silence. I know, because I've dug there. My name doesn't matter. Not anymore. What matters is that I've been here long enough to watch friends die, some natural, some by needle. I work on the burial detail, a crew of inmates chosen to dig the graves, carry the casket, and lower another soul into the ground. According to the Angola Museum Archives and Department of Corrections records, more than 80% of inmates who die here are buried on prison grounds. Their families can't afford the retrieval, or don't want to. So, we bury them ourselves. Each funeral is the same: 6 inmates in white uniforms, a wooden casket built in the carpentry shop, a single chaplain reading from the Book of Psalms. The prison warden usually stands at a distance, arms folded, hat low. Sometimes he says something kind, may he find peace, but mostly, he just nods and walks away before the dirt hits the lid. That's the thing about Angola. Everything echoes, even silence. I remember the first time I stood over the grave of a man from death row. His name was Joseph, but everyone called him Red. He'd spent 23 years waiting to die, then cancer took him before the state could. We built his box ourselves, sanded it down, and wrote his name with a pencil before the varnish. No one came for him. Not his mother. Not his lawyer. Just us, the condemned burying the condemned. When the guards lowered the casket, I saw something that never left me. It wasn't the body. It was the dirt. The way it fell like time, grain by grain, until he disappeared completely. Years later, I'd hear stories about other prisons, about how inmates in Huntsville, San Quentin, and Parchman had their own versions of Point Lookout. But none were like Angola. This place was once a slave plantation, named after the African country where many of those enslaved people came from. And sometimes, when you're out on the fields under that merciless Louisiana sun, you can feel it. The weight of that history pressing down on the soil, mixing with the bones beneath. According to court filings from Wilkerson v. Stalder and state inspection reports, Angola's death row has often been under scrutiny, for its heat, its isolation, its slow decay. Cells like coffins. Lights that never turn off. Some men spend 20 years waiting for execution that may never come. By the time the state calls their number, their minds are already gone. And when they die, whether by cancer, heart failure, or lethal injection, the same handful of us are called to bury them. There's one sound that never fades, the creak of the prison's old flatbed truck. That's what carries the coffin. We load it, drive past the livestock fields, and cross the narrow dirt road that separates the living from the dead. The journey takes 15 minutes, but it feels longer. Sometimes, birds scatter when the engine starts, sometimes they don't. The crows know us too well. The chaplain says we bury about 1 man a week. Sometimes 2. Some years, over 30 inmates are laid into that soil. And every time, we mark it with a small cross made from scrap wood, burned with initials if we can. But not everyone gets that. Some graves are unmarked, just mounds that sink after rain. When the storm passes, we go back with shovels to level them again. Because even in death, you don't get peace here unless someone makes sure the ground stays flat. I remember the day Wallace died. He was on death row too, 30 years inside a cell the size of a bathroom. Never smiled much, but always read his Bible. He used to say, "If the world forgot me, maybe God won't." When we buried him, the sun broke through the clouds for just a second. It was the only time I ever saw light hit those rows of crosses just right, hundreds of them stretching out, crooked and endless. That's when I realized something. Every man here dies twice, once when he stops breathing, and again when no one remembers his name. As the years passed, I started to feel that same silence creeping inside me. Not guilt, not exactly. Just the hollow knowledge that someday, my own grave might sit beside the ones I've filled. And when that day comes, maybe someone else will shovel the dirt over me, whisper a few words, and walk away before the fog lifts. Because at Angola, that's how death works. You come in alive. You leave as part of the land. And the ground always remembers. The ones who wait, life on Angola's death row. Some men count the days till freedom. Others count the days till silence. The walk to death row begins past the cotton fields and the sawmill, down a narrow road lined with oak trees that look more like sentinels than shade. Even the air feels heavier there, thicker, quieter, like the weight of hundreds of final breaths pressed into the walls. Inside the CCR unit, Camp F, Cell Block A, the noise drops to whispers. There are no bars here, only concrete doors with slots for food trays. Behind each one, a man waits. 4 years. Sometimes decades. I've walked that hallway many times, pushing a mop bucket that squeaks across the waxed floor. The guards call us trusties, inmates assigned to clean, serve, or repair. It's strange, they trust us to mop the same corridor that holds men they'll never let walk again. But maybe that's the cruelest part of this place, how routine it makes death feel. Angola's death row houses some of the longest-serving condemned men in America. According to Louisiana Department of Corrections data and court records, executions here have slowed over the past 20 years, legal battles, appeals, politics, yet the cells remain full. More than 60 men still live under sentence of death, though the state hasn't executed anyone since 2010. That's the paradox of this place, it's a death sentence without the death. A waiting room that lasts a lifetime. I first met Harlan in 2009. He'd already spent 18 years in the row. Quiet man, skin pale from the fluorescent light, voice rough like gravel. He was convicted for a crime he swore he didn't commit, but at Angola, everyone swears that. What made Harlan different was how he handled the waiting. He wrote letters. Dozens. To lawyers, to journalists, to a daughter who never replied. He said writing was the only way to remember that words still existed. One day, I saw a guard slide an envelope under his door, returned mail, stamped, undeliverable. He stared at it for a long time before saying, "You ever realize we're ghosts that can still talk?" After that, he stopped writing. There's a rhythm to death row. Lights on at 5 a.m. Breakfast through the slot at 5:30. Yard time for one tier, maybe two, depending on weather and guard mood. 1 hour outside, in a chain-link cage, staring at sky through wire. The rest of the day, back in the box, reading, pacing, waiting. I've heard men argue with the air, pray in whispers, or sing through the vents just to prove they still can. According to a 2017 ACLU report, many inmates in extended solitary confinement develop profound psychological distress, hallucinations, paranoia, and suicidal ideation. But here, no one calls it mental illness. They just call it going deep. There's a saying among the guards. Death row doesn't kill you. It just drains you dry. Some nights, when the prison goes still and the cicadas fade, you can hear a sound, soft, rhythmic, echoing through the vents. The clink-clink of metal spoons on steel. It's how they talk between cells. Morse-like, coded messages that spell names, prayers, curses, memories. That's how I learned about Leonard, a man 3 cells down from Harlan. He'd been on the row since 1983, older than most of the guards. He used to run a Bible study through the pipes, reading 1 verse a night for whoever was still awake. When Leonard died. Heart failure, they said, the silence that followed was worse than the sound. The guards found a Bible open to Ecclesiastes. For the living know that they shall die, but the dead know not anything. They buried him the next morning at Point Lookout. I was there, shovel in hand. His cross sank after the first rain. What people don't see are the small things that make this place human. The way inmates carve chessboards into concrete with toothpaste lids. The way one guard leaves extra salt on a tray when he knows someone hasn't eaten in days. Or how the chaplain keeps a list, handwritten, of every man who's died in Angola since 1901. Over 3,500 names. Some crossed out. Some faded. Some just gone. Every so often, there's a rumor. Execution coming. The guards get tense. The chaplain walks faster. And the row goes dead silent, because everyone knows what that means. Even though Louisiana hasn't executed in years, the ritual still exists. The warden still runs a mock drill every few months, a test, he calls it, in case the call from Baton Rouge ever comes. They roll out the gurney. Check the straps. Run the line. Everything but the needle. I remember one morning when they did it, the entire block went quiet except for one man humming the same hymn Leonard used to read from the Bible. Swing low, sweet chariot, coming for to carry me home. When it ended, they rolled the empty gurney back into storage. But the silence stayed long after the door shut. Some guards handle it better than others. One of them, Officer Daniels, told me once during lunch. People think death row is about punishment. It's not. It's about memory. You forget the faces, or you go insane. He wasn't lying. There's a kind of erosion that happens here, not of the walls, but of the soul. Men stop asking what day it is. They stop caring when mail comes. They even stop writing appeals because deep down, they've realized something the outside world hasn't. In Angola, death is not an event. It's a process. I still remember the day I saw Harlan for the last time. They said he had stage 4 liver cancer. By the time the ambulance came, he was too weak to stand, so they let me help carry him out. He looked up at me and said, barely whispering, "Tell them I waited." That's all I ever did. He died in the prison hospital a week later. No family came. We built his casket in the shop, pine wood, varnished twice. I wrote his initials on the side myself. When we buried him at Point Lookout, I realized that every shovel of dirt wasn't just closing his grave, it was covering a generation of voices that never left these walls. And as the truck drove back toward the main yard, I saw the fog lift just enough to reveal the rows of white crosses glowing faintly in the dawn. Each one was a story no one would ever tell. Each one was a man still waiting for someone to say his name. The farm of the forgotten. How Angola turned life into labor. At Angola, a life sentence doesn't just mean time. It means work until the soil forgets you. The sun rises over the Mississippi like an iron brand pressed into the horizon. The fog burns away fast out here, replaced by heat that clings to your skin like a second sentence. You can see the rows before the sun even clears the tree lean, cotton, soybeans, corn, stretching farther than your eyes can hold. This isn't just a prison. It's a plantation reborn, a farm worked by men who will never leave. And for most of them, the land is both their punishment and their graveyard. Angola sits on 18,000 acres of what was once the Angola Plantation, named after the African country from which enslaved people were brought in chains. When the prison opened here in the late 1800s, little changed except the names on the ledgers. According to state archives and Department of Justice reports, prisoners were leased to work the same fields under armed supervision. The system was called convict leasing, but the men who lived through it called it what it was, slavery by another name. Today, the uniforms are white instead of rags, but the fields remain the same. The sun still burns the same way. The guards still ride horses with rifles across their laps, just like overseers did a century ago. They say Angola is self-sustaining. That it feeds its own population and even sells produce to the state. What they don't say is that every ear of corn, every cotton stalk, every plow line was carved by men serving life without parole, the ones known as lifers. We call ourselves the forgotten farmers. I was assigned to Field Line 4 after my 3rd year. 6 days a week, sunrise to sunset, a hoe in my hand and sweat burning my eyes. The guards yelled commands, cut low. Keep the row straight. While the work gangs moved like machines. If anyone slowed down, the whistle shrieked, and the pace quickened. You could look down a line and see every type of man there is, murderers, thieves, addicts, the broken, the betrayed, all bent under the same sky. Sometimes, you forget your own crime out here. The field doesn't care what you did. It only cares that you keep moving. I remember one man, Raymond, who used to hum gospel songs between rows. Said it kept him sane. He'd been inside since 1977, armed robbery gone wrong. Back then, Louisiana law meant natural life without parole really meant death inside Angola. He told me once, "Every seed I plant, I wonder if it'll grow taller than my chances." He was right. Most of us never see those crops harvested. We work the planting season, but the harvest always belongs to someone else, a newer crew, fresher hands, the next wave of the condemned. The guards say the work is for rehabilitation. But when the heat climbs past 100 and the insects crawl beneath your collar, it feels more like penance. According to court filings from Angola v. Wilkerson, 1998, inmates complained about forced field labor under extreme heat, lack of water, and minimal rest, but the practice continues. The official term is farm duty. The unofficial one is sweat sentence. If you collapse, they'll carry you out. If you die, they'll bury you at Point Lookout. The circle stays closed. Sometimes, the sky changes fast here, storm clouds rolling in like bruises. When the rain hits, the fields turn to mud, and the rows blur together. But the guards don't call off the work. They shout, "Keep cutting." And we do. Because in Angola, stopping without permission is its own crime. The rain hides the tears though. That's the only mercy it gives. After a while, you start noticing things the outside world never will. The way the land hums with history. How the old levee still holds bones from a century ago. The chapel bells that ring for funerals more often than for Sunday service. Sometimes I catch myself thinking that the ground remembers every footstep, every lash, every body that ever fell here. That's what the chaplain means when he says, "This soil is haunted by silence." A few years back, the prison opened the Angola Rodeo, a spectacle where inmates ride bulls and race horses for a cheering public. They call it the wildest show in the South. To the tourists, it's entertainment. To us, it's proof that freedom can be sold for a ticket price. Some men volunteer just to feel something different, the rush, the applause, the illusion of control. But when the crowd leaves, and the fences close again, the silence returns heavier than before. I once asked a rodeo rider why he kept signing up after breaking his ribs twice. He grinned through missing teeth and said, "Because for 8 seconds, nobody calls me inmate. 8 seconds of freedom. Then back to the field." Over time, you start understanding what Angola really is, a world designed to make you vanish without dying. The work, the waiting, the burial, it's all part of a cycle older than the men who run it. When people ask what it's like here, I tell them the truth. Angola isn't just a prison. It's an echo. Of slavery. Of punishment. Of forgotten names carved into wood. Every time I drop a seed into the soil, I wonder if I'm feeding the living or the dead. And every time I walk past the cemetery fence, I swear I can feel the earth breathing, as if the men buried there are still working below us, hands to the roots, keeping the farm alive. Sometimes, late at night, when the moon is high and the fog rolls in from the river, I can see the fields glowing faintly under silver light. The crosses at Point Lookout shimmer in the distance, almost like stars. It's quiet then, the kind of quiet that makes your heart slow down. And for a brief moment, it feels like Angola is holding its breath. Waiting. Listening. Remembering. Because in this place, every man is buried twice. Once in the dirt, and once in memory. And the only ones who live forever are the ghosts still working the land. This story is a dramatized adaptation inspired by real events. Some names, places, and details have been changed for privacy. All information is based on verified historical accounts, Department of Corrections records, and news investigations into Angola prison's history and operations. The last light, redemption, and the voices that refuse to die. In Angola, freedom doesn't come with open gates. It comes with peace before the end. The evening light in Angola has a strange kind of mercy. It stretches long and soft across the fields, turning the razor wire gold for a few minutes before the dark swallows it whole. That's when the voices begin, not ghosts, not whispers, but prayers. From the chapel. From the tears. From men who've accepted that they'll never walk beyond these fences again. When I first came here, I didn't believe in redemption. I thought the word belonged to pastors and liars. But after years of burying men, I started to understand something different. In this place, redemption isn't about forgiveness. It's about remembering. The Angola Chapel program is run by inmates now, former lifers turned ministers. According to Louisiana DOC publications and documented interviews with the New Orleans Advocate, over 200 men have been ordained here, forming the largest inmate-led ministry in the nation. They preach to the same men they used to fight beside, eat beside, and bury. And somehow, it works. One of them, a man named Brother Ellis, used to run with a gang on the street. Now he stands in a pulpit made from old lumber, preaching about light in the darkest place in America. He told me once, "The state owns your body, but your soul ain't on the ledger." He believes that. So do many others. Every Sunday, the sound of voices fills the air, hundreds of men singing hymns in unison, their voices echoing through the steel rafters. It's the only time the guards lower their weapons, the only time the noise isn't punishment. Even death row listens. The chapel broadcasts through the speakers in the CCR unit. Men who haven't seen sunlight in years hum along quietly in their cells. Some of them tap their fingers to the rhythm against the concrete walls, a Morse code of faith. And sometimes, that faith changes things. A few years ago, a young inmate named Jalen joined the burial crew. He was only 21, serving life for something that happened when he was 16. Didn't talk much. Didn't smile. But he had this way of looking at the graves, not with fear, but with curiosity. One day, while digging, he asked me, "You think these men find peace after all this?" I said, "If peace exists, it's buried somewhere under this soil." He nodded, then started carving small wooden markers with the initials of every man we buried, even the unclaimed ones. After a while, he built a whole section, neat, labeled, painted white. The chaplain called it the Garden of Names. And for the first time, Point Lookout didn't look forgotten. It looked remembered. It's strange how memory becomes rebellion in a place built on silence. When the outside world forgets you, saying a name becomes an act of defiance. That's why the men in Angola started something called the Memory Walk, an annual march from the main yard to the cemetery. According to Angola's official publication, the Angolite, it began in the early 2000s, organized by inmates who refused to let their dead vanish without recognition. Every year, hundreds of prisoners walk the dirt road, singing hymns and reading the names of those buried at Point Lookout. Guards stand at the edge, watching. No chains. No guns raised. Just silence. It's the only day of the year when death and dignity walk side by side. But redemption here doesn't always look holy. Sometimes it looks like sweat, or tears, or the shaking hands of an old man writing his last letter. One of those men was Wallace, a preacher now, who used to be a killer. He'd spent 40 years behind bars, and in that time, he buried more than 50 inmates with his own hands. Before his heart gave out, he wrote a single line on a scrap of paper. "If God can find me in Angola, then maybe he never left." The chaplain read those words during his funeral. Even the guards bowed their heads. There's a truth most people never hear. Angola is not just a story of punishment. It's a story of endurance. Of men who built coffins, grew food, preached sermons, wrote songs, and somehow, in all that suffering, built a kind of faith that outlasted the fences. Some people call that redemption. Others call it survival. Here, it's the same thing. The last time I walked to the cemetery, the fog was thin and the crosses gleamed in moonlight. I counted 96 new graves since last year. Each one had a name now, thanks to Jalen and the others who refused to let the forgotten stay forgotten. I stopped at one, a wooden cross marked Harlan M., the man who once said we were ghosts who could still talk. I whispered his name. And for the first time, I didn't feel the silence pressing back. I felt peace. Back at the barracks, the lights flickered as they always do before curfew. Men shuffled in line for count, the same as yesterday, the same as tomorrow. But something was different. You could feel it in the air, that quiet kind of freedom that comes from knowing you've left a mark, even if no one outside will ever see it. That night, I dreamed of the fields again. Only this time, no guards, no fences. Just rows of white crosses, glowing like stars under an open sky. And somewhere in the distance, a voice, maybe mine, maybe theirs, saying, "We're still here." This story is a dramatized adaptation inspired by real events. Some names, places, and details have been changed for privacy. All information is derived from verified historical reports, Department of Corrections records, and journalistic investigations into Angola prison's history and culture. Would you like me to generate the scene-by-scene cinematic image prompts, 16:9, ultra-realistic, with tattoos, fog, and cinematic lighting, for all 4 chapters next, for your video production? The Echo That Never Dies, Legacy of Angola's Dead. They buried the men, but they couldn't bury their stories. When you stand at the edge of Point Lookout Cemetery long enough, you start to notice something. The land moves, just barely. The soft settling of earth, the whisper of wind through grass, the distant echo of boots on gravel. It's like the ground is breathing, carrying voices from a century of punishment, labor, and prayer. People say Angola is quiet. They're wrong. Angola listens. Decades after the first shovels broke this soil, Angola remains a living museum of American punishment. According to state records and historical documents from the Louisiana State Penitentiary Museum, over 7,000 men have been buried on prison grounds since the late 1800s. Some graves have no names, no dates, just numbers pressed into tin. Others bear small wooden crosses carved by fellow inmates, the only sign that someone once cared enough to mark the end. But there's something even more haunting than the cemetery itself. It's how the world outside forgot it existed. Visitors drive up for the Angola rodeo, cheer for inmates risking their lives on bulls, and leave with souvenirs. Yet just half a mile away, the graves of those same men lie under grass and fog, unseen, unmentioned, unvisited. That's the contradiction of Angola, a place where death becomes spectacle, but memory becomes silence. I've met journalists, pastors, even lawmakers who come here for tours. They take photos, ask polite questions, nod at the stories. Then they leave. But the men buried here, the ones who worked the fields, cooked the food, built the furniture, dug the graves, they never leave. They stay beneath the same earth that once chained their ancestors. And the cycle continues. According to court filings and state archives, Angola was once described as a place of exceptional human endurance, a quote from a federal judge during the Gates versus Collier era, when southern prisons were being forced to reform. But Angola never truly changed. It just learned to smile for the camera. The fields still stretch for miles. The work crews still sweat beneath gun towers. And the cemetery still grows, one shovel at a time. I remember one morning when the fog was so thick you could barely see your own hands. I was out there with Jalen, the young one, the artist of the Garden of Names. He was quiet, focused, carving another cross. "Why you keep doing it?" I asked. He didn't look up. He just said, "Because if we stop naming them, they die all over again." That stuck with me. Maybe that's what Angola really teaches, not punishment, not labor, but memory. The kind of memory that hurts to hold, but worse to forget. Every man here leaves something behind. Some leave letters. Some leave carvings. Some leave only rumors. But all of them, in their own way, leave echoes. There's a small chapel near the main gate, white paint peeling, cross crooked on top. Inside, the walls are covered with names written in pencil. Not graffiti. Memorials. Dates of death. Cell numbers. Bible verses. The guards never erase them. Maybe they understand. Maybe they don't. But in Angola, the written name is rebellion, proof that someone lived, even if the state forgot. When the sun sets, the sky over the river turns blood orange, and the fields shimmer under the last light. You can see the silhouettes of the watchtowers. Tall, still, eternal. From a distance, they look almost like crosses themselves. Some nights, I walk the path to the cemetery even when I don't have to. I bring no shovel, no casket, just myself. And I listen. To the crickets. To the creak of wooden crosses. To the river that runs past the edge of the land. And sometimes, I swear I can hear the faint sound of a hymn carried on the wind. Amazing Grace, how sweet the sound. It fades, then returns, as if the land itself is singing for the ones buried within it. In the archives of the Angolite, the prison's own newspaper, one article called Angola, a city of the condemned. It said that if you walk its halls long enough, you'll find every story America wants to forget: poverty, violence, faith, despair, all trapped behind the same walls. But I've learned something they didn't write. Even the condemned dream. Not of escape, but of being remembered right. Years from now, when the last grave is dug, and the last name fades from the wood, I wonder what this place will become. Will they build over it? Will they pave it, plant trees, or pretend it was never here? Maybe not. Maybe Angola will always stand as it is, a mirror reflecting the soul of the system that built it. A system that punishes, forgets, and then buries what it cannot understand. But if you listen closely, on a quiet morning, when the fog rolls low and the sun hits the wire, you'll still hear it. The hum of the tractor. The whisper of the river. The breath of the land. And beneath it all, the echo of men who refuse to disappear. This story is a dramatized adaptation inspired by real events. Some names, places, and details have been changed for privacy. All information is drawn from verified reports, court filings, historical archives, and investigative journalism into Louisiana State Penitentiary, Angola.